Hello there, my name is RB Liz, and have you ever wanted to Star Wars? Sure you have. That's why you're here. Perhaps you're looking to take your friends on an epic journey through the Old Republic and its many wars. Have them do their part in the rebellion against the Empire. Maybe you feel the sequels should have been done differently. Or perhaps you're waiting to unleash your own personal space opera you've had brewing in your head for the last few weeks. Well, my friend, I've got you covered. As far as my qualifications, I have been GMing for over 6 years now and have become a professional GM over at Start Playing. A majority of my GMing time has been for Star Wars games, and I even have a few reviews that say I am good at space. See here. Now that I've presented irrefutable facts and logic, let's start with a fairly reasonable question. 1. What system should I play? The non-tip part of this video. Star Wars has released a few systems over the years. The currently supported system is Fantasy Flight Games' Edge of the Empire, also Force and Destiny, also Age of Rebellion. That's right, there are 3 rulebooks for the same system. This is because each book has its own set of classes with their own set of mechanics to go alongside them. This system also has dice that may look like bocce or ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. These were scary to me, and I didn't want to play the system at first when I saw them. These were also scary to a few of my friends and players, and they didn't want to play the system at first either. However, it is much easier in practice than it is on paper. The system that predates Fantasy Flight, which I'll now simply refer to as Edge, is the Star Wars Saga Edition. This is your standard D20 experience based off of D&D 3.5. Because it's no longer supported, finding the books can be a bit of a pain, but it has a stellar wiki that can answer most of your questions in a pinch. These 2 systems are the ones I would personally suggest. Though I do feel I should shout out Star Wars 5e, it's a homebrew system that exists, and it might be just what you need if you're a 5e player that doesn't want to learn an entirely new system. But I believe both Saga and Edge are better suited to capturing that Star Wars experience. Both are worth your time. Star Wars 5e works as a light reskin to 5e, which might be what you need. But listen in on the pros and cons for Saga and Edge. Or skip ahead on this timestamp if you already know your system of choice. Both systems encourage classing into multiple different talent trees to build a character that is uniquely your own. Aside from their setting, of course, this is where the similarities end. So, let's start with Edge. Why should you choose this system? Edge of the Empire is far more focused in storytelling. That's the reason for the hieroglyphic dice. They're known as narrative dice or roleplay dice. They are a system that allows roles to have 3 different success and fail states. If you wish for me to cover how the dice system works in the future, please comment below and ask. But the gist of it is taking all the dice you have to use for a single skill and rolling it against how difficult or oppressive the task is. Beyond the typical hit and miss aspect, you are also generating additional resources on these dice rolls for either yourself or for the GM to use against you. These are known as advantages and threats. These can be used to further influence events regardless of whether you hit or miss your check before. These can lead to interesting interactions where you miss your attack but you still disarm your foe or knock him to the ground. There are also results called Triumph and Despair, and they're kind of similar to rolling a natural 20 and a natural 1 respectively. But both of these can show up at the same time as well. You might crit your opponent's face off, but your pistol runs out of ammo in the process. This is a joy for players who love improv or contributing to a story. Interpreting exactly what happened with each die combination is amazing, and it can lead to naturally hilarious or epic moments. Because Edge of the Empire is a story-focused game, it is looser on the rules than Saga Edition is. They encourage the GM to change things regularly to fit the story you're trying to tell. Think an enemy is too weak? The book encourages you to make said enemy stronger if that's what the narrative suggests. The game is also designed so it can be played without maps and miniatures. The game uses a system called range bands as a quick and easy way to determine where everyone is relative to each other. Edge of the Empire also doesn't do levels. Instead, players are constantly awarded EXP at the end of a session, sometimes with bonus EXP for completing certain tasks. The default is 10 EXP a session, but I suggest increasing this. Trying to buy skills at this rate is painfully slow. I tend to run my games at 25 EXP a session so that players can usually buy something at the end of one session, but I've heard of other GMs raising this to as much as 50. There are two important factors that I don't exactly consider a pro or con. They are just different from Saga Edition and you need to be aware of them. First, credit costs are considerably cheaper for most things in Fantasy Flight's Edge of the Empire system. It will be important that you don't give out too many credits too early. And that is also tying into... Second, lightsabers are far more dangerous in Edge of the Empire than they are in Saga, and the game knows it. They are insanely expensive compared to other weapons and extremely rare. If you make your players follow the rarity mechanic to see if they could even find the gear they want to buy, a lightsaber will be difficult to track down. So where does Edge fall short? Its dice can be both a blessing and a curse. Because of the additional resources a GM can regularly make use of to hinder players, when it rains for the unlucky player, it's going to pour. The improv element may also not be as exciting for some players, since some kind of struggle in that regard. I also find the range bands can be a bit confusing to understand for some players, especially ones that rely on visuals. Moving a certain distance costs a varying amount of maneuvers, which is normally what your move actions are, depending on how far you want to move. It can potentially spark arguments on how far or close someone is from a game mechanic sense. For those playing with miniatures or on a Roll20-like system, I have a suggestion for you. Simply writing down a solid list of range interpretations can help players understand immediately if they are within a certain range or not. I personally do this in my games, just so players can judge for themselves where they stand, and it helps the game flow faster. Now, what about Saga? What are its strengths? As has been said about the Sheet Show style, its simplicity is its strength. Because it was based off 3.5, the learning process tends to go a lot faster in my experience because most players have played a similar system. As mentioned before, Saga encourages multiclassing. If you look up Darth Vader in the core rulebook, you'll see his stat page is something to the effect of Jedi 7, Jedi Knight 3, Ace Pilot 2, Sith Apprentice 4, Sith Lord 3, and all of these classes build on top of each other without limiting what came before it, and it creates a character that is uniquely Darth Vader. It should also be said that the talent trees in this game are vast. I've had games where 3 players picked Jedi, but all of them played vastly different from each other. One was an unbreakable brick wall, another was a mystic that threw starships at people, and the last was a powerful lightsaber duelist nearly unmatched in close-range combat. The other neat mechanic, though you'll never enjoy it when you're on the other end of it, is the condition track mechanic. This is a simplistic way to track the fatigue of a character due to their injuries. Did you get hit really hard? Harder than a number called your damage threshold? Well, until you take 3 swift actions to catch a breath, you're going to have a -1 on just about everything. Reflex, attack rolls, or your ability to roll anything above a 5, all of it is impacted. Yeah, even your damage threshold goes down by 1, meaning the next hit doesn't even have to hit as hard to shove you down the condition track. Oh, did you not finish nursing that wound? Did you get hit really hard again? Ouch, well now that's a -2 to everything. Ooh, another strong hit. That puts you at -3, right? Nope, you're -5 now. Next hit? You're at -10 and you move at half speed. Another strong hit knocks you out, regardless of how much HP you have. This means you can have a character that specifically works by shoving people down the condition track, since there are many ways to accomplish this, rather than just simply reducing their HP to 0. Now, what about Saga's flaws? Well, if you're sick and tired of the simple passing fail systems of normal D20s, this likely isn't going to change your mind. Due to the vast amount of talent trees in this game, it also isn't particularly hard to break a character for good and for bad, and you can do this early into the game. This can be a non-issue if you know your fellow gamers won't try to min-max a character to create the ultimate OP warrior, but expect power gaps to rear their head early if one player is focusing on winning tabletop. Non-combat characters also have a harder time contributing to combat without some serious homebrew or creativity on part of the DM. The same goes for space combat. I actually homebrewed a lot of space combat actions from Edge's space combat system, and it's really helped players that aren't piloting or manning guns contribute to the combat, so I would suggest you do the same. Otherwise, people are going to be twiddling their thumbs and waiting for the space combat to end. So, in conclusion, what would I suggest? Well, I think story-heavy groups will really enjoy Edge of the Empire, especially once they settle into the system. It really lends itself to the more imaginative part of tabletop gaming. Saga Edition, I feel, is better suited to the more game-focused groups. There are far more force powers to play with, and the class combinations and full builds won't take as long to achieve as they will in Edge of the Empire. And there are an endless amount of playstyles to be had. If you want a preview, poke your head into StarWarsRPGindex.com and try their character planner while you open up the Saga Edition wiki. You'll see how many insane characters you can make. Number 2, how do I war amongst the stars? AKA the tip part of the video. This naturally will vary based on the type of table you have. You could have a set of sandboxy adventures similar to The Mandalorian, or a space opera like the original movies. But hey, all that freedom can be terrifying. After all, is it safe to give your players a ship? What if you set up a story on Naboo and they want to go fly to Nal Hutta? It's happened to me before. It's tabletop. Your players are going to find a way to avoid your plans. They won't even be doing it on purpose. It's just difficult to predict other humans, especially in a group. So, first tip I shall give is... Number 1. Characters are the lifeblood of your game. As soon as you can, work with your players on who their characters are, where they came from, and what they want to do. Have a session 0 with your players to find out who everyone is going to be. This will be easier in a setting like Edge of the Empire, since they have game mechanics tied directly to role-playing. Then, once you've figured it out, find ways to work that backstory into the main story. Star Wars at its core is about heroes overcoming incredible opposition. I take every advantage I can to tie my game world into my player's backstory. This is also helpful to you in several ways. It gives you extra story threads to change the pace. Maybe they just narrowly escaped a scuffle with the Empire? Well, before they can get too comfortable, it looks like an infamous bounty hunter is on their trail, seeking one of the players in particular. In addition to being great breaks in the story, these story threads are also instant motivators to get the party involved. I've yet to meet a player who goes through the trouble of writing a backstory and then doesn't jump at the chance to get invested when you call attention to it. Simply by understanding what your players and their characters want is going to help you create an organic story that simultaneously avoids the railroad feeling, because they'll want to take those routes. Just make sure to keep a pulse on those wants that your players and characters have. Number 2. Setting the tone. The Star Wars universe is vast, and the types of stories you could tell in this universe are vaster. The advantage you have here over writing a book is your protagonists are being made for you, so it's on you to create a compelling story to run them through. Right away, a good idea is to think of the tone. Do you want this to be a lighthearted adventure? Do you want it to be dark and gritty? This is where you'll have to know your audience. Is your table serious about roleplay? There's a good chance they'll want a more serious story so they can fully explore the emotional range of their character. A more gamey group will likely prefer a more lighthearted adventure, since jokes at the table are going to be far more common, and so the tone won't be disrupted. But ultimately, it's your job to know these things. These tips in particular won't apply to every table, so it's important that you get to know them. If the table is of your friends, then you probably have a good idea what they want. If the table is strangers, you got some questions to ask them. Number 3, making friends for your players. One of the reasons for the popularity of BioWare's Star Wars games are their companion characters. Helpful little friends with a well-thought-out backstory that further fleshes out the world. Having a friendly NPC can provide a wealth of benefits to both the players and you as a GM. They can fill roles that no one in the party wants to fill, like being a medic to help fix people up. Not everyone wants to do that, but hey, they just so happen to help out a doctor that plans to travel with them for some time. They can help guide players when they seem stumped, or give them additional avenues to consider or pursue. They can run errands that the players don't want to do or narratively don't have the time to do. The possibilities are endless. However, there are some things to look out for. Unless you're working with only a couple of players, try to avoid NPCs that will take a full turn in combat regularly. It's okay for other NPCs to lend assistance sometimes when in combat, but tabletop games can have a really long wait time for turns by default. The last thing you need is another NPC to roll for and clog up the turn order. These are why the most common types of NPCs I utilize are technicians, pilots, or medics. They do their helpful thing and they end their turn. They usually won't have the stats to make attacking worth it, so it's a good idea to avoid having companion NPCs outshine your players in their area of expertise also. This sometimes might happen without you realizing it, since not everyone is going to build optimally. But if you can avoid it, do so. It is their story after all. If your NPC is going to give out advice, make certain it remains limited somehow. Leave their hints vague or make them a little more human, so have them make mistakes and give bad information sometimes. When you do an NPC right, a companion becomes an asset to your story. When players get attached, they won't want anything bad to happen to that NPC and will walk through fire to ensure their safety. Also, if you ever need to lighten the mood or want a funny character, give the PCs a droid. They are a source of humor that is staple to Star Wars, and their constant misunderstandings of sentient behavior lends itself towards lightening the mood. Number 4. Okay, but the enemies though. This advice is often echoed through most tabletop systems, but I feel it needs caps lock emphasis here. Avoid solo bosses. I repeat, avoid solo bosses. You need multiple threats or your players will kill your big bad immediately. Due to the Edge of the Empire's progression system, most defensive options come at a cost. Some of them are easier to mitigate than others, but most of them will chip away at your character's mental HP. Let's examine Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul. In Edge of the Empire, every time you parry or reflect, it costs mental HP, also known as strain. How long would Maul last? Oh, yikes. Sorry, Maul. Looks like your GM didn't drop enough droidicas to distract Obi-Wan, and now you're dead. In Saga Edition, the Duel of the Fates is far more feasible. Defensive options are powerful in Saga, and don't often cost much to activate. The downside is they will degrade in effectiveness with repeated use until the round ends, or your force points run out. But remember that condition track system that I praised a few minutes ago? Well, if you skipped to this part, then no, and if you didn't, I hope so, because to turn a phrase, crit happens. When it does, your boss is likely to get sent down the condition track, which isn't so bad at first, but your character is getting one turn against multiple turns. The odds of them critting down your Darth Maul before you do significant damage to them is a high possibility, and if they decided to power build, they'll likely do it without crits. Your other option is to homebrew to adjust the stats, but even if you double the HP, there's a good chance it won't change too much. The changes will need to be far more drastic. Or you could place other enemies around your big boss. You could put in hazards or tasks that need to be done. Anything to keep your entire party off the boss will go a long way towards making your own Duel of the Fates. Just make sure you don't load down the encounter with tons of minions. Keep it focused, and then have your minions be smart about how they help out. Have them shoot from a range far away from the boss, rather than throw a bunch of melee guys on top of your people fighting Darth Maul. Number 5. Don't be afraid to adjust the rules. For instance, there seems to be a lot of rules about space travel. Strangely enough, you probably won't need them that often. Unless, of course, you have a campaign primarily set in space. Star Wars is often labeled as a space fantasy, so while there are rules that often list how you effectively astrogate to your destination without blowing up, and tables that list how bad you'll get blown up, I've rarely had my players dig deep into these rules. I've also never had a player stop me and say, Liz, you allowed us to jump into hyperspace too fast. Why didn't we have to make a ton of checks? And that's because I run my game similar to how I view the movies. Space is often a long-term scene transition, with the only exception being when the protagonists get into a space battle. Saga Edition, in true spirit of the prequels, also has a ton of rules around bureaucracy checks and acquiring the proper licenses so someone can buy something on the planet which can take X amount of days and blah 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 blah. I love the prequels, but I don't love those rules. So I simplified them down. My players pay the fee for the restriction on the items, but I don't have them leap through repeated skill check hoops. I run games focused on the characters, and unless their year-long character arc culminates with them rolling a 32 on their knowledge bureaucracy check and then waiting 12 hours, I'm probably just going to simplify it and get to the juicy character moments I know everyone else is waiting for. So, those are my primary tips when it comes to running a Star Wars game. Are there any burning questions you still have and would like to have answered? Ask away in the comments below. If they're short and easy, I'll just reply in the comments. If they weren't more of a response, then I will make a follow-up video. Remember to drop a like if this helped you out, leave a comment if you have any helpful tips for other future GMs out there, and subscribe to the channel for more tabletop goodness. I also talk about writing stuff, which can also be helpful to GMs, and sometimes I do long character analysis, like my Rey one up there, and the narrative problems that she was plagued with. I also have a dramatic reading channel, which you can check out over here. So that will be all for now. So long, farewell, till next time everyone.